You understand that before we get started on this story. You see, there's a preacher that owned a cat. Now, I'm not really sure that anybody ever owns a cat. I think cats own people. Be that as it may, the story was that a preacher owned a cat. Actually, it was a kitty. And kitties do this every once in a while. My sister would have a cat, and something happened to it, and we had another cat, and something happened to it. I didn't do it, but something just happened to them. And once in a while, they'd climb up, and they couldn't get down. This happened to a little kitty. Climbed up a tree, got way up there, and couldn't come down. Too scared, I suppose. So, the preacher went out there to rescue his kitty. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty. But the kitty wouldn't come down. So put a nice bowl of milk at the bottom of the tree to coax it down. It wouldn't come down for the milk. It was up there quite a ways, and the tree was pretty small, and the preacher was kind of large, so it was a big problem. But he figured it out. He got a rope, he tied it around that tree, and tied it to his car. Don't think ahead yet. Tied it to his car and backed it up, and sure enough, it was pulling the tree down. He couldn't quite get it, so just a little more. Nope. And finally, he pulled it back, and the rope broke, and the tree, like that, and the kitty flew off into space. He looked all over the neighborhood, and he couldn't find his kitty. He said that he prayed for his kitty. I guess this is what he said: Lord, I just commit the kitten to your keeping. Would you pray for a cat? If you like cats, you would. Well, he was at the grocery store not very many days after that, and he saw his neighbor lady with a big bag of cat food in her basket. He said, I thought you hated cats. He said, I do. But preacher, you won't believe this. My girl has asked for a kitten, and I said, only if God would give you one. And she went outside and she prayed in the backyard that God give her a cat, and it came down on all fours right in front of her. Said, what could I do about that? God answered her prayer, so we have a cat. Wow. I suppose that really could happen according to what the story was, he said. Prayer is an unusual thing, isn't it? I wonder what would happen if she prayed for a pony. Oh my. I don't know. Maybe God could deliver a pony too, somehow or another. But she got her cat, and she was happy, and prayer worked as far as she was concerned. We want to talk about prayer today, and there's really three divisions of our thoughts. We want to know what the Bible says about God answers prayer. We want to find out some prayers that have been answered in the Bible that are great, and then what about the prayers that don't make it? But there's something about that too, you know. In the book of Matthew chapter 7, Jesus talked about prayer, and he's trying to encourage the disciples to pray, and it was an important thing that they would understand this message. And he made a statement here that sounds fantastic, and some people have jumped on it as if it is an all-encompassing, no matter what verse. And you realize there's more than one verse in the Bible, but this is the basic thing that he is saying. In verse 7 of Matthew 7, ask and it shall be given unto you. Seek and you shall find. Knock and it shall be opened unto you. Wow, just ask for it. Go home and ask for that dirt bike you wanted. How about a Corvette, maybe? Well, about $1 billion. Don't be cheap about it. Ask and it'll be given you, he said. Now, I say again, that's not all there is in the Bible about it. For everyone that asketh receiveth, he that seeketh findeth, and he that knocketh, it shall be opened to him. For what man of you, if his son asks bread, will give him a stone? God's a good God. He'll give you what you ask for. If you ask for a fish, will he give him a serpent? If you then being, oh, by the way, if you ask your mom for candy at mealtime, it won't work. You know, how about a donut just before it's time to eat? No. A cookie? No. Not every prayer is answered by every dad. You understand? Because there are some other conditions. But generally speaking, if a child wanted a fish or wanted some bread or something like that, dad would be more than glad to feed the child. If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts unto your children, how much more shall your Father which is in heaven give good things to them that ask him? Therefore all things whatsoever you would that men would do unto you, do unto them, for this is the law and the prophets. So he's tying into our lifestyle and all kinds of things, and God the Father, and we need more verses than that, but the basic thing is God wants to answer. He loves you. He's your Father, and you're his child. He wants to make you happy if he can, and he wants to satisfy your needs, and he's been in the business for a long time, the Bible, doing that. In the book of Luke, a couple of times Luke records things that he'd heard from others about Jesus. The Holy Spirit reminded him of it. And he was saying in the 18th chapter that sometimes you have to maybe ask a little bit longer than you'd like, but God is working us out and trying to see how we will do in all of that. He said in verse 2, there was in the city, Luke 18, a judge. He feared not God. He didn't regard man. The only thing he was concerned about is himself. Well, you've seen people like that. Make a point of, I don't believe in God. I'm an atheist. Oh, by the way, they said the other day that about 10% of atheists pray regularly. I don't know who they pray to, but they do. They pray to themselves. I don't know. They say people in foxholes always pray. There's nobody down there but wants to pray and ask God for help, and it seemed like prayers are a regular thing. People really pray more than they go to church, frankly. They pray more than they read their Bibles. Prayers have a regular thing, especially if you're in school and it's a test then too. He didn't regard God. He didn't regard man. He didn't fear any of that. And there was a widow in that city, and she came unto him and said, avenge me of my adversary. There's somebody ripped me off, and I want you to help me. Widow can't help me. I mean, she's a poor widow. She can't pay and retainer. She's just a bothersome. Just forget her. You don't forget persistent widows, let me tell you that right now, because she had a determination, and she had nothing but time and determination. That's what she had. Okay, and her mind said, okay, if that's the game we play, that's the game we play. And she came the next day. And she came the next day. And she came the next day. And I don't know how many days she came, but she kept coming, and after a while he said to himself, though I fear not God, verse 4, and don't regard man, and I certainly don't think much of this widow woman, but she's bugging me to death. She'll probably stay forever. I think it was one of the financial guys on the radio was talking about a woman who, she thought she got a bad deal on her car, and something thought the dealer should do something, so she walked in and said, I need to talk to the manager. Said, well, he's out. I said, I can wait. Pulled out her knitting and started knitting. Said, you don't understand. He's on a vacation. I can wait. Wouldn't you know it, the guy is suddenly home from the vacation in just a few hours came and talked to her because she was there for the long haul. She's going to knit to closing time. They might have to push her out the door. She's going to be back tomorrow morning. She's going to keep knitting until she gets something done. That's persistence. That's what the widow had. She had no money, she had no lawyer, she had no right, she had nothing, but she had time and determination, and she had a desire, and she was going to see that was done. And the judge says, all right, because she troubles me, I'll avenge her, lest by continually coming she wearies me. And the Lord said, hear what he's saying. He told that story for a point. Shall not God avenge his own elect, which cry day and night unto him, though he bear long with them? We'll maybe save some of the answer to that for a little bit later, but God will answer somehow, some way, his people. Maybe not the way you want, but he will answer, and things will be fine when it's all said and done. Jesus talked about it. He talked about prayer, even maybe how people pray in the same chapter. Two people went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, one a publican. Pharisee was such a religious person. The publican was a tax collector who ripped off people and probably had very little time to go to church because he really wasn't accepted there. You go to church, they didn't want to sit by him. Didn't like him. But he went to church anyway this week, and the Pharisee stood and prayed with himself. Is that what you pray? To yourself? That's going to do a lot of good, isn't it? But that's what he did. He was praying to be heard first, that he felt so good about what he said because he was saying it so well, and then he was glad people could hear it because it sounded so good. And if that's what we're concerned about, how people hear us and what they think about us, how well it's said, you missed the whole point. God's your Father. You want to talk to him like you do to your father, with sincerity and honesty and openness and a real love. But he prayed, God, I thank you that I am not as other people are, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this publican here. He didn't know him from Adam, but he knew he was a bad guy. You just could tell. And I'm not like him. He was not like him. That was true, but he didn't understand that. I fast twice in the week. I give tithes in all that I possess. And the publican standing afar off would not lift up so much as his eyes to heaven. Now, he's not praying to be saved. Let me remind you of that. These are two Jewish people. They're already in God's covenant. They're not praying the sinner's prayer or anything such as that. That's not even in the Bible, what we're talking about, to be saved. He's not praying to be saved. He's praying to get his sins remitted because he has been an unfaithful Jewish person to God. He would not even look up. Because he calls him God, you see that. Saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. The publican who prayed sincerely with a few words, heartfelt words, God liked that. The other prayer, it's all he gets, is whatever joy he gets out of it, and others think he's so good. Everyone that exalteth himself shall be abased. He that humbleth himself shall be exalted. And many other passages about prayer. He urging us to pray without ceasing, and all kinds of things about prayer. Whatever you do, pray. And it's the very thing that covers our whole armor, like the shield and all of that. Prayer is all around us. That's the main defense, first of all. So there are many verses. We have not time enough to read all them. But let's go to number 2. Can God give cats? Can God do things? Can God answer prayer? Well, the answer is certainly, the Bible is definitely he can in many different ways, and has. The Bible said in the book of James that there was a guy named Elijah. It said he's just like you, a man of like passion. He was no extraordinary anything. He was just an ordinary guy that had a tremendous amount of faith and did what God told him to do. And apparently God and Elijah got together somehow or other, and he prayed that it wouldn't rain. It's not going to rain. He even told the king that. You talk about a weather forecaster that would go out on his, it's not 20% rain, 30%, it's a 0. There is 0% of rain coming. There is none till I pray for more. Ahab, listen to me. No rain, not a drop, until I pray again. And then he walked away from him. I suppose Ahab thought, yeah, right. But he prayed, and God wanted him to pray that prayer. And God answered that prayer, and it didn't rain. It didn't rain for 6 months. It didn't rain for a year. It didn't rain for a year and a half. It didn't rain for 2 years. It didn't rain for 3 years. It got mighty dry. And it was because of their sins that God tried to get their attention. God would rather not turn the rain off or turn it on or anything like that, like the flood. He'd rather not. But we don't pay good attention. We don't listen very well until we have a tragedy. They knock down a couple towers in New York and we all go to church. And then a month later we all forget about it. It irritates God. And God gives you all the blessings you have, and you eat and enjoy all that. This is wonderful, and God gets nothing out of it. No thankfulness, no service. God said, I got to do something. Remember about the guy it was just a story. The guy was in a tower, and he had some rocks and he had some pennies. He couldn't get out, needed some help, and he'd drop a penny down to get some help. People pick up the penny and just walk off. And when he dropped a rock on them finally, they looked up. What was that all about? When God drops you pennies and stuff, we just pick them up. Isn't that wonderful, and use them? And when God dropped a rock on your head, whoa, wait a minute here. God rather not drop rocks on your head, so to speak, but he might have to. And so they had no rain. Then they had a contest, didn't they? And that man that prayed for no rain prayed fire out of heaven. Lord, send down that fire. And that fire came down, and it burned an animal, and burned up stones, and burned up water, and there was nothing left. That was mighty, mighty strong fire, I'll tell you what. And then they killed all the false prophets. And then he said, I'm going to pray for rain. I believe you better get in your chariot and hurry. And there wasn't a cloud in the sky. There was nothing looked like rain. And he said, after about 7 looks, he said, I can see a small cloud coming over the Mediterranean, coming this way. You better hurry. Well, he had gotten his chariot. and took off. My, there's a mighty rain. God empowered Elijah. He outran that chariot. He ran around it. He kept on going. He got home, and Ahab got soaked. But I guess if I was Ahab, I'd be glad to be in the rain, wouldn't you? No rain for 3.5 years. Man, send it down. Feels good. Made everybody happy but Jezebel. As you remember how the story was. That man could pray. And it said if the prayer of a righteous man is prayed, it will be effective. That's James chapter 5 in your Bible. Well, there was a lady who went down to the temple. Tabernacle, I guess we should call it. The main temple hadn't been built yet. And she was praying. She was praying so much in her heart, her lips moved, but you couldn't hear anything coming out. It was too deep to say. And the prophet, priest, judge, which what Eli was, all of them, became and said, "Woman, please. I know this is a feast day, and I know we all have a good time, but please don't come to the temple drunk." He said, I'm not drunk. I am of a sorrowful spirit, and I've been praying from the depths of my soul. And he didn't ask what it was. He said, "Lady, whatever you want, you're going to get it." And what she wanted? A son. Not just any old son. She wanted a son so she could give that to God in service. That's what she wanted. I want to give God a son. I want to give God a. We need better priests. I want to give him one of those. What do you think happened? Well, you know what happened. She went home. It wasn't very long till she had that son. She nursed that little son until he was able to go to the temple of God, probably about 3 years of age, took him down there and gave him to the old man Eli, who told her quit being drunk. And by this time he couldn't even see. There were ladies around there, they helped the little boy, and pretty soon the little boy had a little cot in the priest's bedroom so that the priest needed something at night, he could go get it for him, maybe during the day too. And God talked to that little boy. And that was Samuel, who became probably the greatest of prophets and judges of them all, because a mother prayed. And you know what God did? Well, since you gave me one, I'm going to give you 5. You never outgive God. You never get ahead of God. So she had one in the priesthood, so to speak, and then she had 5 of them at home that she could raise and enjoy as her own. God, yeah, I can give a kitty. He surely could. If he could give a son, I would think so. And they prayed for manna. Moses did anyway. God asked God to do that. And they had manna for 40 years. I guess if God could rain down food, I guess he could give a kitty if he wanted to. He could do all of that, how big that was. And if a prophet could look at a whole army and say, "Lord, please blind them." And he did. And this old Syrian army couldn't see a thing, and he led them down the road, took them to the capital and surrounded them, and then gave them their sight back. Now, you talk about powerful prayer, that you can make people blind and make them see again. At your prayer. Do whichever. Fed them, and then sent them home. And they never felt anything like that. They didn't come back either. You want to come back and deal with that guy again? I don't think so. What would he do the next time? I have no idea. I don't like being blind. I don't like walking down the road. It's nice to see my sight. I might not get it back next time. I think I'm staying home. Prayer is that important and that powerful. And they wouldn't go anymore. And Hezekiah asked God to take care of him, because we're surrounded by an enemy that has so many soldiers we can't even count them. They'd offered, the enemy had to offer them extra horses to put their soldiers on so we'd have a fight. And the poor old guy, the king Hezekiah, didn't have enough people to put on the extra horses. He just said, "God, what are we going to do?" He prayed, "God, deliver our city." And the preacher came and said, "You know what? I'll tell you what to do. Tonight, go to bed. Don't stew. Don't walk around. Don't wring your hands. Don't be in despair. Don't take another aspirin. Don't do any of that. Just go to bed. Just sleep. It'll be fine." Yeah, but all those guys, God is watching. Put God on the night shift. And that's what he did. And he went to sleep, and the next morning they found out that 185,000 soldiers had been killed, not by us, but by God with one angel. Talk about overwhelming power And God has legions, tens of thousands of angels, and he only sent one to do all of that in answer to prayer. So great and marvelous things have been done by prayer, there's no doubt about it. And we see things that told us we should ask and seek, and yet, thirdly, what about those prayers that don't seem to get answered? That's pretty much a puzzle, isn't it? I worked with a guy, and he said he was an atheist. And we would talk, and I, well, why are you an atheist? And one day he just confessed to me. He said, well, my dad was sick, and I prayed for God to make him well, and he died. So there must not be any God, and I just quit believing in God because of that. Well, there's more to it than that. God says he'll hear. God says he'll answer his children. I'm not sure that Dick was even one of his children, far as that was concerned, but God does hear even sinners when they pray. In certain case, like Cornelius, he was praying, and God sent him a preacher. Maybe one of us students was the preacher that God sent to Dick, and he didn't recognize that. Maybe that was the problem. I don't know. But we could never quite get him to understand all of that. Does God always answer the prayer you want the way you want it answered? Well, let's take a look at a couple things in the Bible, try to figure it out. God's bigger than we are. Of course, it's hard to figure, but here's the Apostle Paul. He had some kind of physical problem. If anybody's in with God, it's Paul, right? I mean, he's about his right-hand man. Writes half the New Testament. Got to see Jesus, about the last one to see Jesus in person. I mean, had his power. He could do miracles. They could just bring a piece of cloth and lay on his body and take it to the sick person. They were healed. I mean, this guy is super number one, right? So he tells God one day, he said, I've got this problem. We think it was his eyes. I've got a problem, and I don't want to have this problem. Just take it away, please. And God said, no. No. And he prayed a second time for the same thing. And he prayed a third time for the same thing. And finally God said, do not pray that prayer anymore. I will not answer that prayer. That's not a prayer. But he said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I will answer it a certain way. You see, when you ask for something, God may give you something else that's better. Not more pleasant, necessarily. Not something that you would like, but in the long run of your spiritual and the conditions of the world and everything else, is what God sees that you don't. He said, listen to me. When you're weak, you're strong. Well, he said, because when you get weak, you depend on me. You realize that if everything's going, I'm Paul. I've been educated. I saw Jesus. I know. He said, that's what you do when you're strong. You think you've got it. It's you. But it isn't you. And when you can't do it, you say, oh, Lord, I got to have your help. And when I help you, more good is done than before. Now, Paul had enough sense to hear that, and he said, I will then glory in my weakness because I see more done for God. The whole point of our life is for God, right? Not us. We're an instrument in his hand. We're a portion of his great plan. And so whatever we do should be more for the glory of God than us. And so Paul felt that. Okay, now I see why that prayer didn't get answered, because the way I wanted, I see it answered bigger than I thought. And of course the classic would be Jesus in Gethsemane. Here's God's own son. I mean, wow, he is deity. And he tells the Father he doesn't want to go to the cross. Let this cup pass from me. God says no. That's quite a wrestle. I mean, can you imagine father and son, deity and deity, God and God, having this prayer contest, so to speak. I don't want to, but you're going to. Well, how'd that work out? Well, Jesus had enough sense to say, as we should, not my will, but yours be done. You see, the problem when we get into a problem, we don't like the way the prayer was answered, not answered, is because we got our will in the way. We're the roadblock. Rather than saying, well, Lord, okay, you've got a different plan. Let me understand your plan. Let me submit myself to you. And that's hard to do. It's not easily done. It's a lot of tears and a lot of suffering in that. And he suffered a lot, and his sweat was like blood coming out of his head. I mean, it was tough. It was difficult in Gethsemane. But he finally acquiesced to the Father. And God sent what? An angel. And comforted him. And he went through all of the beatings and everything with great success and patience and calmness, and he glorified God and all that. And because he died on the cross, you are a Christian. You know what happened if God said, okay, no cross, you don't want to go across. We'll just answer your prayer the way you want. And you know what? There would not be a single soul saved. Because he was the Savior. He had to shed his blood. Without his blood, there's no remission. He had to do that. God saw a bigger plan than his physical self did. And so many times it is that way. We don't understand God. God would rather do something for us and as a father bless us, but sometimes he has to say no. Sometimes the fault is ourselves. James says you have not because you ask not, number one. And secondly, you have not when you ask because you ask amiss to consume it upon your own lust. If God did that, how you glorify yourself, how you trust yourself. Oh, I'm really rich now. I don't need God anymore. Look all the money I got that God gave me, or maybe forget God even gave it to you. Look how strong, look how healthy, look how pretty, look how whatever I am. And you might just bypass God altogether. God says, no. You're not going to get it because you would be able to use it like you should. God can do marvelous things. We need to have a confidence in prayer. That's why we talked about this in the first place. God can give kitties, I think, or he can give horses, he can give whatever he wants to give, and he might, and he has in the Bible given unbelievable gifts, but at the same time, God reserves the right to give you something better than you ask for. If you're a child of God, that's what he'll do, and what's good for you is what? Your own spiritual development. Oh, Dad, I don't want to do this homework. Okay, don't do any homework. I love you, child, and I don't want to. No, you know what a good dad will do? You've got to do this. That's how you learn. I don't want to do these chores. They're difficult. It's hot outside or whatever. No, you got to learn to do these chores. This is the way it is. That's how you develop your life. It would be a poor parent who doesn't discipline and who doesn't say no to when we have our little whims and what we'd rather do. God's your spiritual father. You act just like that to him. Oh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to. That's too much. And God says, no, you're going to have to do this because I want to develop you into the person you need to be. Hard to do. Hard to understand. But may we say, Lord, your will, not mine, be done. That's what our Song 333 says as we finally close with the idea of what prayer is all about. His way. Lord, here's what I want. I don't like to do that for you. And sometimes he does. And God's blessings are stupendous. But sometimes he has to say, no, this is better. And don't lose heart, because he is doing what's best for you, as hard as that seems. So we trust him, even in the darkest of night, knowing that he is God.